HOA demolished my cottage for safety violations. They forgot I'm the building inspector. Before we start the story, please comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I still remember the day I bought my dream cottage. It was a small, charming place at the edge of Pine Lake Estates. The cottage had white walls, blue shutters, and a garden that bloomed with wildflowers every spring. I had saved for 15 years to buy this place. Every extra dollar from my job as the county building inspector went into my savings account. When I finally signed the papers, I felt like I had achieved my life's goal. My name is Robert Mitchell. I have worked as a building inspector for Westlake County for over 20 years. I know every building code by heart. I can spot a safety violation from a mile away. My colleagues call me By the Book Bob, because I never cut corners when it comes to safety. I take pride in my work. Houses need to be safe for families to live in. When I moved into Pine Lake Estates, I didn't pay much attention to the homeowners association. The HOA seemed like a simple group that managed the community pool and organized the annual summer barbecue. I read the covenant agreement before signing it. The rules seemed reasonable. No loud parties after 10 p.m. No cars parked on the street overnight. Houses must be painted in approved colors. I had no problem following these rules. My cottage needed some work when I bought it. The previous owner was an elderly woman who couldn't keep up with maintenance. The roof needed new shingles. The porch steps were loose. The electrical wiring in the kitchen was outdated. I planned to fix everything myself over time. I had the skills and knowledge to do it right. The first 3 months in my new home were perfect. I spent weekends working on small projects. I replaced the kitchen sink. I fixed the squeaky floors in the hallway. I painted the living room walls a warm cream color. My cottage was becoming the cozy home I had always dreamed of. Then I met Victor Harmon, the president of the HOA. It happened on a Saturday morning when I was building a small flower box for my front window. Victor stopped by my cottage with a clipboard in his hand. He wore pressed khaki pants and a polo shirt with the Pine Lake Estates logo. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "I'm Victor Harmon, president of the HOA. I don't believe we've formally met." I shook his hand. "Robert Mitchell. Nice to meet you." Victor looked at my half-finished flower box with narrowed eyes. "Are you aware that all exterior modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before construction begins?" I wasn't aware of that rule. I looked at the simple wooden box I was building. "It's just a flower box," I said. "Rules are rules, Mr. Mitchell. I'll need you to fill out Form 27B and submit it for approval. In the meantime, please halt your construction." I thought he was joking at first. The flower box was barely visible from the street. It matched the color of my house. It wouldn't bother anyone. But Victor wasn't smiling. "Sure," I said. "I'll fill out the form." Victor handed me a thick packet of papers. "While I'm here, I should mention that your grass is 5.3 inches tall. Our regulations specify a maximum height of 5 inches. Please address this violation within 48 hours. As he walked away, I stared at the ruler he had used to measure my grass. This seemed excessive, but I didn't want to make waves in my new community. I mowed the lawn that afternoon and filled out the form for my flower box. 2 weeks later, I received a letter denying my flower box application. The reason stated, "Proposed design does not harmonize with community aesthetic standards." I looked at my simple wooden box and wondered what could possibly be wrong with it. I called the HOA office and asked for clarification. The Architectural Review Committee has determined that wrought iron flower boxes are the approved style for Pine Lake Estates, the secretary told me. Wrought iron would cost 4 times what I had spent on wood. This seemed unnecessary, but I decided to comply. I removed my wooden box and ordered a wrought iron one from a local metal worker. I was determined to be a good neighbor. Over the next few months, Victor found many violations at my cottage. My mailbox was 2 inches shorter than regulation height. The color of my new curtains was visible from the street and clashed with the neighborhood palette. I had planted vegetables in my backyard without submitting a garden plan. Each violation came with a fine. The fines started small, $25 for the mailbox, $50 for the curtains. But they quickly added up. I paid them all without complaint. I wanted to fit in. One day in early spring, I started replacing the roof shingles on my cottage. The old ones were worn and beginning to leak. As the county building inspector, I knew exactly what needed to be done. I pulled the proper permits from my own office. I bought high-quality materials that exceeded the county code requirements. I took a week of vacation to complete the project. On the second day of work, Victor showed up with two other HOA board members. "Mr. Mitchell, did you get approval from the Architectural Review Committee for this roof replacement?" Victor asked. I climbed down from my ladder. I didn't know I needed HOA approval to replace a leaking roof. "I have the county permits right here." Victor shook his head. "County permits are irrelevant. All exterior work needs HOA approval. Those shingles you're using aren't on our approved list." I looked at the shingles. They were top-quality architectural shingles in a neutral gray color. "These are better than what was on the roof before," I explained. "They have a higher wind resistance rating and a longer warranty." "That's not the point," Victor said. "The point is that you didn't follow the proper procedure. The board will need to discuss this violation." A week later, I received a letter from the HOA. I was being fined $500 for unauthorized roof replacement. The letter also demanded that I remove the new shingles and install approved ones at my own expense. This crossed a line for me. The shingles I had installed were perfectly safe and looked fine. Replacing them would cost thousands of dollars for no good reason. I decided to appeal the decision. The appeal hearing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, I continued to work on my cottage. I replaced the old electrical wiring in the kitchen. I installed new energy-efficient windows. I reinforced the porch steps. All of these improvements were done to code, exceeding code requirements actually. I pulled all the proper permits through my office. The night before my appeal hearing, I received a notice on my door. The HOA had scheduled an inspection of my cottage the following week to assess compliance with community standards. The appeal hearing did not go well. I sat at one end of a long table in the community center. Victor and the 6 other board members sat at the other end. I presented my case calmly and professionally. I explained that the shingles I had installed were high quality and safe. I showed them the county permits and my professional credentials as a building inspector. "While we appreciate your expertise," Victor said with a smirk, "the fact remains that you violated the covenant agreement that you signed when you purchased your property. The $500 fine stands, and you have 30 days to replace the shingles with an approved style." I left the meeting feeling frustrated and disrespected. These people knew nothing about building safety or construction quality. They were making decisions based on appearances rather than structural integrity. The HOA inspection of my cottage happened while I was at work. When I returned home, I found a list of 17 alleged violations taped to my door. Most of them were ridiculous: unapproved door knocker design, non-standard interior light bulbs visible through windows, unauthorized placement of garden hose. But some of the items on the list concerned me. They claimed that my electrical work was suspect, and that my new windows were installed improperly. These claims questioned my professional ability and integrity. As a building inspector, I knew that my work exceeded all safety standards. I called Victor that evening. "Some of these violations are commenting on the safety of my renovations," I said. "I'm a certified building inspector. I know the work is safe." "Our inspector disagrees," Victor replied coolly. "The HOA has the right to enforce its own standards, which in some cases exceed county code." "Who is your inspector?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "We use a private consultant," Victor said vaguely. "All violations must be corrected within 2 weeks, or additional fines will be imposed." I hung up the phone and paced around my cottage. Something wasn't right. The HOA rules couldn't supersede county building codes. And who was this mysterious inspector who thought they knew better than me? The next day at work, I did some research. I looked up the Pine Lake Estates HOA registration with the county. I searched for any building permits or inspection certificates filed by the HOA. What I found was troubling. The HOA had never registered any private inspector with the county, which was required by law. The violations they cited on my property weren't based on any recognized building code. And most concerning, Victor Harmon had a side business as a contractor who specialized in bringing properties up to HOA standards. This looked like a scam. Victor was finding fake violations, then probably steering homeowners to his own company for repairs. It was unethical and possibly illegal. I decided to fight back. I wrote a detailed letter addressing each of the 17 violations. For the safety-related items, I included copies of the county permits and photographs of the work showing that everything was up to code. I hand-delivered the letter to the HOA office and requested a formal meeting with the full board. 3 days later, I received not a meeting invitation but another violation notice. This one claimed that my cottage had structural deficiencies that made it potentially unsafe for habitation. The HOA was giving me 30 days to correct these unspecified problems or face additional consequences. This was absurd. My cottage was structurally sound. I had inspected every inch of it myself. These false claims about safety issues made me angry. They were using scare tactics to bully me into compliance with their arbitrary rules. I decided to take a more direct approach. I went to Victor's house on a Saturday morning. He lived in the largest home in Pine Lake Estates, a 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping. I knocked on his door and he answered in a bathrobe, looking annoyed. "Mr. Harmon," I said, "we need to discuss these alleged structural issues with my cottage. As the county building inspector, I can assure you that there are no safety concerns with my property." Victor's eyes widened slightly. "You're a building inspector?" "For 20 years, I confirmed. I've pulled all the proper permits for my renovations. Everything is up to code or better. So I'm confused about these violations you've issued." Victor's demeanor changed immediately. He invited me inside and offered me coffee, which I declined. He explained that there had been a misunderstanding, and that perhaps the HOA inspector had been overzealous. "I'll speak to the board," he promised. "I'm sure we can resolve this amicably." I left feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe now that Victor knew my profession he would back off. I was wrong. A week later, I came home from work to find a formal condemnation notice on my door. According to the document, the HOA had determined that my cottage was unsafe for human occupancy due to multiple serious code violations. I had 48 hours to vacate the premises so that necessary remediation could begin. This was outrageous and completely illegal. A homeowners association had no authority to condemn property. Only the county building department, my department, could do that. I tore the notice off my door and called the HOA office. The secretary informed me that Victor was unavailable and that the board's decision was final. I spent that evening taking photographs of every inch of my cottage, documenting the condition of the structure and all of my renovations. I printed multiple copies of all my permits and inspection certificates. I was preparing for a legal battle. The next morning, I went straight to the county attorney's office. I explained the situation and showed them the condemnation notice from the HOA. The attorney was as shocked as I was. "They have no authority to condemn your property," she confirmed. "I'll send them a cease and desist letter immediately." I felt relieved as I drove to work. The county attorney would set things straight. The HOA couldn't bully a county official with false safety claims. That afternoon, I had inspections scheduled on the other side of the county. I spent the day checking new construction sites and signing off on completed work. It was a normal day except for the nagging worry about my cottage situation. As I drove home that evening, I saw smoke rising from the direction of Pine Lake Estates. My heart began to race. I pressed harder on the accelerator, taking the turns into my neighborhood too fast. When I reached my street, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My cottage was gone. In its place was a pile of rubble with a few wall sections still standing. A bulldozer was parked in what used to be my garden. Men in hard hats were loading debris into dumpsters. I slammed on my brakes and jumped out of my car. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted. A man in a suit approached me. He identified himself as Alan Parker, the vice president of the HOA. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm afraid your cottage had to be demolished due to imminent safety concerns," he said with false sympathy. The structural issues were deemed too severe for remediation. I was speechless with shock and rage. They had demolished my home while I was at work. Everything I owned was under that rubble. "You had no right," I finally managed to say. "This is illegal. You can't condemn or demolish property without county approval." Alan handed me a document. "We had authorization," he said smugly. "Everything was done by the book." I looked at the paper in my hand. It was a demolition permit with my name forged at the bottom. Someone had faked my signature to authorize the destruction of my own home. "This is a forgery," I said, my voice shaking. "I never signed this. I never authorized this demolition." Alan shrugged. "Take it up with the county," he said, walking away. I stood there in the street, staring at the ruins of my dream cottage. My hands were trembling. My mind couldn't process what had happened. They had destroyed my home based on false safety claims, and they had forged my signature to do it. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The shock gave way to cold, focused anger. They had picked the wrong person to mess with. I was not just any homeowner. I was the county building inspector. I knew the law, I knew the codes, and I knew exactly how to fight back. I pulled out my phone and called the county sheriff. While I waited for the deputies to arrive, I took dozens of photographs of the demolition site and the workers. I collected the names of everyone present. I secured the forged demolition permit in an envelope. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, I explained what had happened. They took my statement and spoke to the demolition crew. The crew claimed they had been hired by the HOA and had been told that all the paperwork was in order. They had no reason to question the permit that had my signature on it. I spent that night in a hotel, too angry and devastated to sleep. I had lost everything, my home, my possessions, my sense of security, but I still had my knowledge and my determination to see justice done. The next morning I went to work early. I pulled every record we had on Pine Lake Estates. I reviewed every permit, every inspection, every complaint filed over the past 10 years. What I found was a pattern of abuse by the HOA, led by Victor Harmon. Victor had been using his position to bully homeowners and steer renovation work to his own construction company. He had been operating without proper licenses. He had been cutting corners on safety measures. And in several cases he had submitted paperwork with forged signatures. I compiled all this evidence and took it to the county prosecutor's office. The prosecutor reviewed my findings and agreed that crimes had been committed. She assigned an investigator to the case and promised to pursue charges against Victor and the HOA board. But criminal charges wouldn't rebuild my cottage. For that, I needed civil action. I hired an attorney who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. She filed a lawsuit against the Pine Lake Estates HOA Victor Harmon and everyone else involved in the illegal demolition of my home. The legal process was slow and frustrating. The HOA hired expensive attorneys who tried to drag out the case. They claimed that I had violated multiple covenant agreements. They argued that the demolition was necessary for community safety. They even suggested that I had authorized the demolition verbally, which was a blatant lie. During this time I stayed with a friend who lived across town. I had to buy new clothes, new toiletries, new everything. My insurance company was hesitant to pay out my homeowner's policy because the demolition was authorized by the forged permit. I was fighting battles on all fronts. 6 months into the legal process we had a breakthrough. The demolition company's foreman came forward with a recording of his conversation with Victor Harmon. In the recording, Victor admitted that there were no real safety issues with my cottage. He said that I needed to be taught a lesson for questioning the HOA's authority. This recording was the smoking gun we needed. The criminal investigation accelerated. Victor was arrested on charges of fraud, forgery, destruction of property, and conspiracy. Several other board members were also charged as accomplices. In the civil case, the HOA's attorneys suddenly became interested in settling. They offered me the market value of my cottage plus $50,000 for my troubles. My attorney laughed at them and countered with a demand for 5 times that amount, plus punitive damages. The negotiations continued for weeks. Eventually we reached a settlement that included full replacement cost for my cottage, compensation for all lost personal property, additional damages for emotional distress, a complete restructuring of the HOA board and rules, and my attorney's fees paid in full. It wasn't just about the money though. I wanted to make sure this couldn't happen to anyone else. As part of the settlement, the HOA was required to adopt new bylaws that limited their power and increased transparency. All future board members would need to undergo training on homeowner rights and proper procedures. Victor Harmon and 3 other board members were convicted of multiple felonies. Victor received a 5-year prison sentence. The others got probation and community service, plus orders to pay restitution to other homeowners they had victimized. 1 year after the demolition of my cottage, construction began on my new home. I designed it myself, incorporating all the safety features and quality materials that I had always advocated for as a building inspector. The new house was bigger and better than my cottage had been, but I still felt the loss of the charming little place that had been my dream home. The new HOA board, led by a retired judge who moved into the community after the scandal, was respectful and professional. They approved my building plans without a single objection. Several of my neighbors who had their own stories of bullying by Victor's regime, brought food and housewarming gifts when I finally moved in. Today, 3 years later, Pine Lake Estates is a different community. The HOA focuses on maintaining the common areas and organizing social events. They leave homeowners alone unless there's a genuine problem. My experience changed things for the better, though at a terrible personal cost. I still work as the county building inspector. My colleagues still call me by-the-book Bob. But now I have a new mission beyond ensuring that buildings are safe. I've become an advocate for homeowner rights. I speak at community meetings about how to recognize and fight HOA abuse. I've helped draft county regulations that prevent homeowners associations from overstepping their authority. Sometimes, when I sit on my new front porch in the evening, I think about my old cottage. I miss its quirky charm and the sense of achievement I felt when I first bought it. But I'm proud of how I responded when it was taken from me. I didn't just rebuild my home, I helped rebuild my community. Victor Harmon made a critical mistake when he targeted my cottage. He thought I was just another homeowner who could be bullied and exploited. He forgot to check who I was. He never realized that I, Robert Mitchell, was the county building inspector. I knew more about safety codes and building regulations than he ever would. And I used that knowledge to bring him down. The lesson in all this is simple: knowledge is power. When you know your rights and have expertise in your field, no one can use false claims to intimidate you. My cottage may be gone, but my determination to protect others from similar abuse grows stronger every day. As I watch the sunset from my new porch, I feel at peace. Justice was served. My home was rebuilt. And most importantly, I made sure that no HOA in Westlake County will ever again demolish someone's home based on fake safety violations. That's a legacy I can be proud of.